this widow, so the judge, he has the power to administrate and declare justice. The widow, she has this grievance. She has an enemy, an opponent, someone who has probably wronged her, and she's seeking justice. And so she keeps coming to this judge. What we know about a widow, how does someone become a widow? How does a woman become a widow? Husband dies, right? And in this society, that makes a woman very vulnerable. So she's already suffered this personal tragedy of not having her husband anymore, and that would probably mean that it diminishes her status in society, and she doesn't have the income and the provision of her husband. So she's already vulnerable in this ancient society. And she has this conflict with an adversary. We're not told what it is. It could be someone owed her money, or someone made a promise to her, or someone took something from her and didn't pay for it, or someone owed her husband money and she's seeking for it. If there's anyone who's vulnerable in this society, it's the widow. And so she has this case. She's seeking justice. And she comes to the judge, hoping that he will grant it to her, that he will tell the town elders or the town leadership or the offending party, hey, you need to grant this widow what she's asking. Her case is right. Someone owes her. So that's what she's hoping for. She's hoping for justice. She's hoping that this judge will give her justice. The judge, we know, he's an unjust judge. So here's his response in verse 4. And he would not for a while. So he doesn't. You would think when we build up this story, this lady's husband has died, she's vulnerable in this society, her status is diminished in this society, what's she going to do for work, what's she going to do for food or whatever? And she comes to the judge who's supposed to care for the widow, care for the poor, who's not supposed to pervert justice. He's supposed to have a regard for her, and he's like, no, I'm not going to. He would not for a while. Then he has a change of heart. It says, afterward he said within himself, though I fear not God, nor regard men, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. He says, my heart hasn't changed. I still don't care about God. I still don't care about man. It's not like this, judge became a Christian or something and then everything's okay. No, he specifically says, I still don't care about God. I still don't care about man. But this widow keeps bothering me. So I will avenge her, I will grant her justice, I will grant her what she wants, or else she will wear me out. Isn't it interesting that this parable starts with Jesus' encouragement that men ought always to pray and not faint, or not grow weary, not become worn out, and that's what happens to the judge. So one who's granting the petition, he's the one who says, if I don't do this, I'm going to become worn out. I'm about to faint. I'm becoming weary. So it's like the tables are turned. Because she did not become weary, she brought him to the point where he was growing weary. The judge sees this as in his own self-interest to help this widow. It's not about him having a change of heart. It's not about him saying, I really should obey God in this matter. It's not about him saying, I really should care about that widow. She's in a bad spot. No, this is about his own self-interest. It says, if I don't do this, it's going to make me crazy. How many people have kids who liked video games? Okay? Me and my brothers, growing up, we had a Nintendo and some other systems, and me being, older than my younger brothers, there's always a situation where you're playing a video game, and you're doing well in that video game. You're Mario, and you're level 8, and you're about to win, right? You're doing really well, and then your younger brother who's watching you play, oh, can I have a turn? Can I have a turn? Can I have a turn? Is it my turn yet? How many people know what I'm talking about? Anyone who has kids knows that. And then you don't want to, because you say, this is before the time that you could save games, and now you can just save it, but in those days you couldn't save games and say, well, if I give it to you, you're not going to do well, and you're going to die, and I'm going to have to start all over again. But you just become wary and say, okay, fine, ruin my game, fine, do it. Well, you don't do that because you want to. You do it because you just get frustrated. You say, okay, fine, I'll give you what you want, just leave me alone. You do it out of your self-interest. So the judge doesn't have a change of heart, doesn't have any compassion, just says, if every day this widow comes and bothers me, I'm in my house, I'm in the synagogue, I'm in the marketplace, I'm with the town elders, there she is. Oh, judge, remember my case? How's my justice doing? Have you thought about it yet? He says, that's going to wear me out. Here, let's hear it. Someone do what this lady is asking for. Someone owes her, let's take care of it. And Jesus says, and here's where we make the transition from the earthly story to the spiritual truth. Okay, remember, earthly story illustrates the spiritual truth for us. Jesus says, verse 6, consider the words of the unjust judge. He says, take heed to what the unjust judge says. So let me read that again. In verse 4 and 5, and he would not for a while, but afterward he said within himself, though I fear not God nor regard man, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. And so what I want you to keep in your mind is this. What I want to ask is this. These parables sometimes are difficult because Jesus uses some really shady characters to illustrate a spiritual truth. Think about that. Does anyone have a problem with that? That he uses an unjust judge to illustrate God. That's what the unjust judge illustrates, right? This guy who was corrupt, as one of my Sunday schoolers said today, who had no care about God, who had no care about man. Why is that the illustration for God? Wouldn't you think that if Jesus was going to illustrate what God is like, he would say, well, there was a benevolent, kind, mighty judge who was just quick to listen to the petitions of his people. That's the illustration we're supposed to get about God. Why an unjust judge? I want to ask you, am I the only person that has a problem with this parable? Or does that seem a little weird? Raise your hand. That seems a little bit skewed. What's wrong with this? All of my kids in Sunday school agree. Yeah, there's a problem here. And I like that because I think teenagers sometimes are more willing to question things than adults are. And I question this. Why would Jesus use that? How does that make me motivated to pray? Oh, the unjust judge represents God. Now go pray. Whoa, that is not something I want to deal with. I think the answer is found in verse 7. He says, and shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them? The connection is this. Not that God is like the unjust judge, it's that God is the exact opposite from the unjust judge. You see, here's the point. If the unjust judge, the point, some people take this the wrong way, as people do with many parables. They just have an ability to mess up the meaning of the parables and lose, what Christ is trying to say. I've heard it said, like some people have this image of this. Well, the point is that you just keep bothering God to give you what you want, and someday he'll just annoy him so much he'll finally do it. That's not the point of this parable. That is wrong. If you've heard that before, that's incorrect. What this is like in Hebrew poetry, it's like saying if one thing is true, if the lesser example is true, then the greater example is true as well. It's like me saying, how many people here like good coffee? Good coffee. Okay? I know the getting is good, right? She does that. And so here's what I would say. It's like saying this. Now, can we agree that President Obama is of a greater status and respect in society than we are? We can agree with that? Yeah. Okay. So it would be like saying, if the Giddings like good coffee, then certainly President Obama likes good coffee. It's like saying you move from the lesser example to the greater example. So the thing is, what Jesus is saying is that if this is true for an unjust judge, then it's certainly true for God. Right? Does that make sense? Does that help us not to scandalize the meaning of this parable? If an unjust judge is moved to action by the persistence of this widow, this guy who's corrupt, unrighteous, doesn't care about God, doesn't care about man, then how much more would God be moved to action by the petitions of his own people? If it's true for the lesser example, it's certainly true for the greater example. This is something that is found in Hebrew poetry all the time. That's the way Jesus thinks, and that's the way he speaks. Let me give you another example. Jesus says in another parable, another illustration, he's talking about the fathers who give good gifts to their children. He says, how many of you, if your child was hungry and your child asked you for an egg, would you give him a rock? Or if a child asks you for a fish, would you give him a scorpion? No. The obvious answer is no. And Jesus says, well, if you, being imperfect, sinful people, you still love your children, you still give good gifts to your children, then how much more the Father will give good gifts to his children? If it's true for the imperfect example, it's true for the perfect example as well. So Jesus makes these connections and uses parables in this way many, many times. If an imperfect judge who doesn't care about God or his fellow man can still be moved to action by persistence, then how much more would God be, who is actually righteous, who does have compassion for his people? I also want to talk about why the widow kept coming back. We also need to consider think about yourself. When we think about our patience and our persistence, if you just don't have that persistence in you, think about how patient and persistent and enduring you are with the institutions all around you. You want something from someone, or someone owes you something, well, you constantly kind of badger them about it. Like if you have a younger sibling, like my video game example, they want a turn, and they're going to keep on asking you, can I have a turn yet? Can I have a turn yet? So we're taught, we learn to be persistent with the world around us. But sometimes when it comes to our relationship with God, we lose that ability to be persistent. We think, oh, it hasn't happened, and we become wary. So what would it take for us to become more persistent in our relationship with God? So Jesus says, shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry unto him day and night, though he bear long with them? The argument moves like this. The unjust judge is contrasted to God. The widow is compared to God's chosen people. Her continual coming is compared to our prayers to him day and night, and the justice that she wants, it compares to him granting us our petitions that we want from him. This word in verse 7, I'll touch on this because it's there. And he says, shall not God avenge his own elect? I'll define that word for you. Sometimes we get hung up on this word. The word elect means choice. We have an election. We choose who the president is going to be. When it talks about God's elect, it means God's chosen people. And there's different arguments about that. What I want to encourage you with is this. What we believe and teach about the elect is, if you're here this morning, if you have faith in Christ, if you believe in his gospel, you have made the choice to do so. But that choice, I believe, Scripture teaches, is a result of him working in your heart first to draw you to him. So if you're here, it's because Christ has worked in your heart. He's stirred in your heart. He has created faith in your heart first. And we get caught up with that because we say, oh, if I'm elect, then why should I pray? Why does anything matter? Complete opposite here. Complete opposite. You being chosen by God is the motivation for you to pray. Do you see that? That he's trying to teach you that you need to be persistent in prayer. And the way that he says it is he says, you're God's own elect. That God has this special care for you, has this special regard and commitment and eternal love with which he has loved you. That's your motivation. That draws you back to him over and over and over in prayer. He says in verse 8, I tell you, he will avenge them speedily. The justice that we want from God, he will grant it speedily.